Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man? They say murder three. Strange things that happen here. How stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree?
Welcome to Strange Things, broadcasting from the Arkanasa Radio Studios in Laredo, Texas. And welcome to the show. I'm your host, Chris James. Tonight, we're going to be talking about the Laredo Paranormal Research Society book. Tonight's show came about when I was rewriting a book I first put out when I retired. When the book was first thought of, I had said it would be dynamic. It could be changed as time went by. As new members came on board or new cases were investigated, I would add to the original manuscript. It's been a few years now and I'm redoing the book. I always had the idea that someday I was going to write a book. I think just about everyone has this idea as they grow up and then old. The people have ideas on what they think would make an interesting story, and someday soon, they're going to put their ideas down in print. Someday. The trouble is, most folks are waiting until the right moment in time to get started. The absolute correct moment when the planets are aligned and the stars are ready. The people will wait right up until they're being lowered into the ground, hoping to get their words on paper. I would never have gotten started if not for my wife. She told me I should write a book based on something that had happened to me back in 1989. A truly strange thing. When my class arrived in Laredo, Texas, fresh from the Border Patrol Academy, we thought we knew what we were doing. All that training must have been there to make us able to handle just about anything, right? When we got to our stations, there were 36 of us and only 20 journeymen, of whom 6 were on detail. So in order to get us the real training, they would put 2 or 3 of us in a vehicle with an old-timer. Old-timer being anyone with a year or more on the job, and then they would send us out. As soon as we had passed our year on probation, we were ready to face the line on our own. Some nights there might be only 6 or 7 agents working. 2 or 3 always had to go to the checkpoint, which left some really big gaps in our coverage. We were lucky to have 2 agents working upriver and 2 downriver. Upriver was usually busy, so they had a small area to cover, and downriver had a huge amount of territory to try to manage. At midnight, we set out with orders to stay out of trouble and hopefully catch a few aliens. I forget who my partner was that night. I do remember he was newer than me. The other team was just as green as we were. As we're heading south along Highway 83, we spotted a bonfire up on a hill. The hill was near what we called the party house, which was a partially built house at One River Place. We decided to check it out, hoping to catch a load of dope and get a few points with the boss. Our vehicles used to have a switch that killed all the lights, brake lights and reverse lights, so you could drive around without being seen. I turned all the lights off and we drove towards the fire. The road was paved until you crested a small hill, and then you had to turn off onto the gravel. Trees lined both sides, so we couldn't see what was ahead. I drove slow so the crunch of gravel wouldn't give us away. At the end of the gravel road, it took a sharp turn and headed up to the top of a hill. I made the corner and started up the hill. At the top of the hill, I was somewhat shocked by what I saw. My partner was really shocked. There's a movie I've seen several times called Race with the Devil. Peter Fonda and Warren Oates. Two guys stumble on a group of Satanists sacrificing a girl. The Satanists chase the two and their wives, who are now all in an RV. It didn't turn out well for the folks in the RV. They all die in the end. There at the top of the hill, I came upon a group of about 15 or 20 people, all dressed in long brown robes. They all had their hands in the air, and they were standing around the bonfire that had brought us to the location in the first place. The first thing went through my mind was that movie. Two or three people turned towards us and came our way in what looked like a semi-hostile manner. They weren't waving knives or guns or anything in the air, but they didn't look too pleased to see us either. My partner had enough. He yelled, "Let's get out of here," and I threw the vehicle into reverse and hit the gas. We shot backwards at a good rate of speed. Now, I had no reverse lights, and I could only guess where I should take the sharp turn left. I was still accelerating backwards when I heard the tires hit the pavement. I slammed on the brakes, threw the vehicle into forward, and away we went. It wasn't until we were back on Highway 83 before either of us asked, what had we just seen? Our next question was, who do we call about it? Our other team was about 10 minutes away if they came code 3. The nearest sheriff's deputy was about 20 miles away. DPS only had a few troopers in the area, and none of them were working midnights. We kicked ideas around all night, finally coming to the conclusion that the best thing to do was to not tell anyone. We didn't want to get a reputation as a couple of weirdos who saw things. As the sun was coming up the next morning, we pulled into the station and we reported that there hadn't been much excitement that night. The following night, I drove down there and looked for any dead bodies or anything I might be feeling bad about later. The footprints were all barefoot. They were all around the ash pile as if these people had been dancing in a circle. No cars had been anywhere near the place. I wondered how they got there. Did this bunch walk barefoot through the brush that is filled with mesquite thorns and cacti? Not to mention all the broken beer bottles. The scene kept playing out inside my head on a regular basis. The kind of thing you just can't get rid of. Just over 19 years before I told anyone about that night. The guy that had been with me had moved on to some other agency. When you had your 20 years in, 20 years of service, suddenly no one gave you any crap about anything. You were one bad day away from walking, so they would treat you a lot nicer. Just about everybody at work used to listen to Coast with Art Bell. It was cool to have something to keep your mind going as the long night stretched out into the early morning. Every Halloween, Art would do Ghost to Ghost. You could call in and tell your scary stories if you had one, and if it was up to Art's liking. Art Bell decided to retire, and so he left the show. It continued, but it just wasn't the same. A Ghost to Ghost did continue each Halloween. I wrote in and told the producer my story, and he liked it. I was told I would be on the show Halloween night. And then my schedule was changed. I had to work that night, and I found a recording on my answering machine saying I had been missed. While teaching a first aid class, I just mentioned how I had missed being on Coast to Coast to tell my story about the Satanists. One of the students said he'd had a similar experience, only his had been in the gravel pit. He said he'd driven up on 15 to 20 guys standing around a bonfire, long brown robes, and he also said that he'd gotten out of there as fast as he could go. Then I met another agent who had a similar run-in with these guys, only his was down in San Ignacio. This was all over the course of a few years. Art Bell discovered he couldn't stay off the air, and he started a radio show called Dark Matter Radio. Along comes Halloween, and Art was going to do Scary Matter for that night. I wrote in, and I was told I would be on the air. I told my boss I was absolutely not coming in no matter what. I then made a pot of coffee, set a chair in front of the radio, had the phone in my hand, and I waited. At about 20 minutes after midnight, the phone rang. I got to talk to Art Bell and tell everyone about the night I ran into and away from a group of Satanists, just like in the movie, but without all the dying in the end. The next day I heard from all the guys at work who had heard me talking to Art Bell. If you want to listen, just go to YouTube and search for Spooky Matter with Art Bell, October 31st, 2013. I come in at about the 20-minute mark, but you should listen to the whole show. It's worth listening to. Then I discovered that the story was still stuck in my head. I had just told the whole world, but I was still thinking about it. My wife said, "Oh, why don't you write a book?" Well, the book would only be about 2 pages long, and no one wants to read a tiny little book like that. As she said, build it up, expand the story, make it into a novel. After thinking about it for a few days, I sat down at my computer and I started writing. I changed the main character into a young boy. I moved the location up to the piney woods. I add all manner of crazy things that I could think of. Ley lines and energy and dowsing rods and all the neat things that are talked about on Coast to Coast. There is a lot of bloodshed. It is no kid's book. But I finally managed to write Ragman, and I self-published it. The story goes that Jim Richards joins a small-town sheriff's department after leaving the Dallas police. He's hoping for a much quieter and less exciting life. When bodies begin to show up, some who are drained of blood, others that are torn to pieces, he finds himself pursuing a bizarre monster that is made up entirely of rags, but in a human form. These creatures have enormous strength. Jim has to find out who controls these monsters if he hopes to save the people of his town. You can find the book at Amazon.com, or you can order it at most bookstores. A lot of the folks that read it said they liked it, even though it's not the best written book out there. They say it was original. And I'd known Ishmael Quayer for many years. I'd never said anything about ghosts or UFOs to him because I didn't want him to think I was weird. Ishmael had never mentioned ghosts or UFOs to me because he didn't want me to think he was weird. I ran into him at a UFO convention. I asked what he was doing there, and he told me that he was one of the presenters. That's when I found out about the LPRS. I asked Ishmael one day if he had ever thought of having the Laredo Paranormal Research Society's history put down in ink. He thought this was a great idea, and so we began. I was given all their case notes, videos, and audio recordings. I spent days, and then weeks, and then months, listening and watching, and trying to make sense of what I was seeing and hearing. I also tagged along on ghost hunts and UFO watches. As the investigators were looking for ghosts or aliens, I was watching them and writing down everything that they did. My notes were usually a mess because I was writing in the dark. I would have to check later with the investigators to be sure that what I'd written was what they'd been doing. Before the group was officially formed, there had been a few requests made for their services, and this is how they got started. Back in 2001, a Laredo police officer contacted Ishmael about some strange activity near a call he'd been on. The officer had been responding to a domestic disturbance on Shiloh Drive. Near the call, he had seen 3 abandoned houses, all sitting side by side. After the call, he noticed that there was a crucifix had been broken and left laying in the driveway of one of the houses. Inside this house, there was all the furnishings that had been left by the previous tenants. The living room was full of furniture. There were clothes in the closets, and the cabinets in the kitchens were filled with canned goods and dishes. In the backyard were grave markers. Lots of grave markers. There were more than 200, dating from the 1800s to the early 1900s. The markers were delineated from low-price tin crosses to large stone markers. Someone said, "Let's go check it out," followed by, "What do we need?" They decided they should take a camera and maybe a flashlight, maybe a baseball bat and a golf club, impromptu weapons in case they find something they didn't want to deal with. 8 men jumped into a pickup truck, 3 in the front seat, 4 stuffed into the back seat, and 1 was stuck in the rear of the truck. They drove over to the site to see if there were any spirit activity. The area around the abandoned houses was as quiet as a tomb. The air was still, and it was about 50 degrees out. The 8 soon-to-be LPRS members went about looking into the graveyard to see if any ghosts could be seen. They moved about amongst the grave markers, not too sure how to investigate the scene. It's not the kind of thing covered in school. Take a few photographs, make a recording asking a few questions. Now, keep in mind, the TV show Ghost Hunters wouldn't be on for another 3 years. They had nothing to go on other than their own imagination. When a drizzle began to fall, they moved inside one of the houses. The group was in the process of investigating when they heard what sounded like a horse whinnying very loudly in the yard right behind the house. Looking into the yard, they could see there was nothing there. Nothing that could have made such a sound. It came again, right next to the house. Now, somebody said, "I think I've done about enough for tonight. It's time we get out of here." And somebody else said, "I've had way too much of this place." Along with, "I'm ready to go now. Let's get going before this rain gets any worse." The guys made their way to the truck in a slow rush. Nobody wanted to be left behind on their own. The slight drizzle had been falling for nearly an hour before the team had jumped into the truck and fired it up. Pulling forward, the front tire dropped off into a ditch. Now, with thoughts of being attacked by ghosts and ghouls and goblins, the guys had to try to get unstuck so they could go home. There they were in the driving rain, trying to coax the truck out of its predicament. It took nearly 2 hours to escape from the abandoned houses. After the group became the LPRS, they would return to the Shiloh Cemetery 8 more times. The next time would be in 2004, and it was listed as case number 073. By the time they returned, they would have acquired much better equipment and far better investigating skills. The Laredo Police Department SWAT unit used to train at this old hospital, and they said they had encountered some unusual activity. With no paranormal investigating team in Laredo, Sergeant Halomo decided to ask some friends of his to just take a look and see what happens. The sergeant had met Ishmael at a training session he'd been conducting at Laredo Community College. Knowing Ishmael had cameras and recording equipment and an unquenchable curiosity, he decided to give him a try. Well, Ishmael said, "We don't do ghost investigations. We're into astronomy." The Shiloh investigation wasn't yet considered an investigation. It was more like just a bunch of guys having fun in the dark. Sergeant Halomo tried harder. "Oh, come on. It'll be like a training video. Just run around and videotape everything you see." Well, Ishmael thought it sounded like a neat thing to do, having seen a few shows on TV about ghost hunting, and so why not do a ghost investigation? So this time, 7 investigators gathered some equipment together and ventured forth into the unknown. Before moving to their new location on Saunders, the old hospital was located on Logan Street. Over 100,000 people were born at the old hospital. I was unable to find out how many people had died there. Today, if you go down into the lower parts of the building, you can still hear voices and footsteps moving about. This was case number 001, December 12th, 2002. The first thing they did was a safety brief. They were told that the floor is in good shape, there are no holes or weak spots. There are lots of stairs they would have to climb, so nobody should slip or fall. No one wants to get hurt inside an old unused hospital. They were told to be careful that they didn't get lost. There are lots of hallways running in every direction, and there's hardly any light in any of them. For some odd reason, all the signs telling you where you were going had been removed. There was also broken glass everywhere, so they should be careful where they sit or where they place their hands. Some uncouth individuals had seen it necessary to go to the bathroom right in the middle of the floor, in more than one location. So everyone was advised to watch their step. They didn't want to have to burn their boots later on that night. The group went into the old hospital to see if there was anything to be seen. First off, they did a thorough sweep of the building to be sure that they were alone. Any sounds made had to be accounted for. If you're in the middle of an investigation and you think you hear voices from beyond the grave, only to discover you're communicating with some inebriate, it would make all of your evidence suspect. It was also a safety consideration. There are those who hide from society because they refuse to follow the laws of the land. They just might try to steal some of the expensive investigative equipment. That could lead to a bad outcome for the thief. Most of the LPRS team members are in law enforcement. There were 2 points of entrance, and both had obstacles that made a great deal of noise while moving. no one could ever sneak in unannounced. After setting up a few cameras in strategic locations and setting out some recording devices, they broke up into teams and went about the mission at hand. And there I'm going to take a brief pause, play some commercials and drink some coffee, so don't go away. We'll be right back after these important messages. You're listening to Arkanasa Radio. Do you have skin? Would you like to take better care of it? Call Lourdes James, independent beauty consultant, and set up an appointment. Call 723-3019. Back in 1776, someone said, "Give me coffee or give me death." And if that's how you feel, you should be at the Organic Man Coffee Tribe. They make coffee the right way, one delicious cup at a time. 4501 McPherson, Suite number 9. Coffee, the stuff dreams are made of. If your vision isn't what it used to be, and you're not sure you're seeing Bigfoot or just your neighbor mowing his lawn, stop on by Del Norte Optical, 107 Calle del Norte, just across the street from the Embassy Suites. You should be able to see what you're looking at. Did you hear a bump in the night and you think it just might be a ghost? Contact the Laredo Paranormal Research Society at laredoparanormal@hotmail.com. That's the LPRS for all your otherworldly needs. This is Arkanasa Radio you've been listening to. Well, I didn't really need that. One of my computers just decided it was time to go black. Fortunately, I managed to get it back up before I needed it. It's just not a radio show without some kind of bizarre technical difficulty, is it? Up on the 3rd floor of the old hospital, Manny was conducting an EVP session with the sergeant. He asked, "Is anyone there that would like to speak to us?" They heard a groan, as if somebody were in pain. The odd thing was, they heard the sound without having to use the recorder. Manny said, "We hear you. Can you do that again?" There was more sounds of someone in pain. "Keep making noises. We hear you." This last was a yell. Other members of the group began to make their way to the two doing the EVP session because they were practically yelling for the entity to make more sounds. One of the arrivals said, "Hey, you two, keep it down. We're trying to..." Manny said, "Listen. You can hear someone right down the hallway. This is a DVP. A DVP stands for Direct Voice Phenomena, as opposed to an EVP, which is an Electronic Voice Phenomena, where you only hear a response while playing the recording back at a later time. A quick check of the recording showed the sound of the unknown entity had been captured. Someone said, "We heard your voice. Can you give us a sign that you're really there?" Well, suddenly a gust of wind, somewhere between 30 to 40 miles an hour, came in through the broken windows. It stirred up dust and debris, slamming doors, and it rattled the windows. The hallway doors, that were the double size to allow the passage of hospital beds were bowing in the wrong direction. Ishmael grabbed his cell phone and called his wife, who had chosen to stay in the pickup truck down in the parking lot, as she was studying for upcoming registered nurse exam. He asked her if it looked like it was going to rain, like maybe a storm was coming. Well, she responded that she didn't know what he was talking about. She said the sky is clear and there's not a cloud visible. Well, Ishmael said that the wind was blowing like mad and it was kicking up dirt on the third floor. Well, his wife said, "What do you mean? There's no wind down here." The area where their vehicles were parked was covered with debris from around town, and nothing was being blown around. This bizarre localized windstorm lasted for about 6 to 8 minutes. The wind had been blowing straight out of the north, and then it stopped. All anyone could say was, "That was weird." In Laredo, the predominant wind comes from the southeast. Well, Gabrielle Cuellar finished her studies and passed her nursing exam. As they reviewed their findings after the investigation, they found that they had captured some out-of-the-ordinary evidence. Audio recordings of a disembodied voice. The words were unintelligible, but it was definitely a voice. A second voice recording of "My body is dead" had been captured while standing in the morgue. They also found a photograph of a green energy orb that was exiting from the ceiling and then traveling down the third floor hallway. This had been caught by Tony Hurd. While reviewing the photographs, this one made everybody sit up and take notice. In an effort to debunk the photo, they had it examined by a photography expert. No one could say how the image was made. It was deemed to be genuine. I had the opportunity to walk through the rooms, the corridors, and the hallways of the old hospital on more than one occasion. The feeling of not being alone, even though I was, stayed with me as I went. I was a member of the special response team for a lot of years, like about 25. We trained with the SWAT guys in the hospital. After one particular training session, as I was exiting the building, I checked my cell phone. It showed I had a missed call. The number said 666. I showed it to Sergeant Halomo, and he said that's really bizarre. Sergeant Halomo asked if I thought the place might be haunted, and I said yes. He said a group had spent the night there and had some strange things happen. He never bothered to say that he was one of the group and that he had had the life scared out of him. December 2nd, 2014, we went back to the old hospital to do another investigation. Once again, we broke up into teams, and the team I was in went down into the basement. We were en route to the morgue. The morgue just happens to have been across the hallway from the cafeteria. I guess this was to save on freezer space. Just keep the vegetables in the top drawer along with that body. We walked down a staircase and turned left. Ishmael was on my left and just ahead a little bit. He was wearing a pair of full-spectrum glasses with a 6-hour recording memory. Everything in the wearer's line of sight was recorded at 5 megapixels with a 170-degree angle of sight. You can buy these at Amazon for about $45 or $50. This allowed him to move about without having to hold a camera and try to photograph anything that caught his eye. Something moved to our right. Ishmael said, "Did you see that?" Then he started to cough. He had a hard time getting words out. I looked from him to the door on our right, not sure of what I'd seen. It was just a shadow in the darkness. Later, while reviewing his glasses memory, he found a spot where he had started coughing. Just seconds before, he had swung his head around past the doorway. There, on his computer, was the image. It kind of had a human shape. It had come out of the door and right at him. It filled the door, so it had to have been 6.5 feet tall. These were hospital doors. It filled the opening. A black shape and a dark opening. I tried to make a copy for the book, but it just looked like a dark photo with nothing in it. If I used software to enhance the exposure, then it looked fake. I didn't want anything in the book that would look fake, so I didn't include it. Only with the movement could you see the shape as it came towards the camera. That was a wow and a half. The Laredo Paranormal Research Society is also into UFOs. For some reason, a lot of people are embarrassed to tell anyone they think they might have seen a UFO. And why would that be the case? Anytime the subject of flying saucers or UFOs come up, somebody will trot out the old party line, "Only crazy people see flying saucers." Not true, but that's how people have been trained over the years. I used to wear a hat with UFO magazine embroidered across the front, just like the one Bill Burns wears. In fact, my wife bought it from his wife. I would walk around with it, and some folks would stare. Then they would come over and they'd ask me if I believed in flying saucers. I would say yes, I did. Inevitably, the person would look over their shoulder to see if anyone was watching. They would then tell me all about what they had seen. Sometimes it was just a brief story. Other times it may take 15 minutes. Without fail, they would ask me not to tell anyone. They were afraid of being embarrassed. I've heard a lot of stories from people who think they're a member of a tiny group of people who have seen something in the sky that they can't explain. Something like 58% of the populace believe that we're not alone and that UFOs are here. That 58% are worried about the other 42%. I've seen UFOs. Unidentified means I don't know what they were. And I'm not alone. Thousands of people see things in the sky that are unidentified, and that makes them UFOs. Ishmael Quayer first became interested in the subject while trying to explain to his daughter what a bizarre-looking star was. He grabbed a star chart, being an amateur astronomer, and tried to make sense of this anomalous object. They were both surprised when the star in question suddenly vanished. Later that same year, he saw the same light in the sky, this time in the company of his wife, his mother, and his father. Once more, almost on request, the star vanished. His wife said, "Great, now you're going to want to study UFOs." And she was right. While gathering background information on the LPRS, Ishmael wanted to show me some new night vision scopes he had just purchased. Stepping into the backyard, we looked around the black night sky, only to spot a bright light traveling from north to south. The light was not visible to the naked eye, and it moved way too fast to be an airplane. The light was steady, never blinking. As we followed it, we spotted a second light going the opposite direction. Soon we had the rest of the LPRS members out watching the sky. If it had been a satellite, that would have been one powerful scope, since satellites are about 200 miles away and they don't have any running lights. We continued watching the sky using both naked eye as well as night vision scopes. The lights continued to be visible, but only with the scopes. One of the most fascinating encounters came in October of 2010. At about 10:30 p.m., while panning the night sky with his third-generation night vision scope, Ishmael was just looking at the stars when he saw a three-sided flying craft passing over northeast Laredo. The craft was totally shrouded in infrared light, which is invisible to the naked eye. It resembled a triangle, and it had 3 bright spheres at each of its points. This UFO had no sound of any propulsion, and it silently cruised at approximately 1,000 feet in the sky. After catching what would amount to one of the best images of an unknown craft, Ishmael thought that it may have been a secret military aircraft or possibly some kind of a drone. Standing there all alone in the dark, he recorded a mystery that was well worth pursuing. After showing the video to other LPRS members, they had the images analyzed using color spectrum and temperature filters. The video specialist also used image control as he tried to dissect the information held in the camera. The specialist noted a light that cloaked the aircraft or the triangular UFO with infrared light that could not be seen with the human eye, only through night vision cameras. The video had provided other professional videographers and experts in ufology an amazing amount of evidence of an unknown craft, either from out of this world or as something may be controlled by the military. However, if this were a military craft, why was it being flown over Laredo, Texas? The military owns most of Nevada. Something like 85% of Nevada is either government-owned or controlled. Vast areas that a craft of this kind could be flown without running the risk of discovery by the citizens. Also, if the military had this kind of aircraft, why are they running the risk of being run into by conventional aircraft being flown out of Laredo Airport? The pilots would not be using night vision and therefore not be able to see this giant flying triangle. We may never know the truth about this mysterious craft that flies with no combustion, no engine sounds, and not seen with the naked eye, only with sophisticated night vision cameras. We don't know if this is extraterrestrial, natural phenomena, or something secret from the military. For now, we call this paranormal or unexplained. After viewing the strange craft, Ishmael was unable to sleep until about 7 o'clock in the morning. This was one of those experiences that makes life worth living. The YouTube video says it was in 2011, but no, it was in 2010. You can watch it for yourself. Just go to YouTube and search for Laredo Triangle, and you'll see it. Noe Torres invited the LPRS to attend the Roswell UFO Festival. Mr. Torres is an author, a publisher, a UFO investigator, member of MUFON, and a lecturer from Edinburgh, Texas. He has penned many books on the subject of UFOs, such as The Ultimate Guide to the Roswell Crash, Aliens in the Forest, The Real Cowboys and Aliens, The Kawayami Incident, Mexico's Roswell, The Other Roswell, The Fallen Angel, which is the story of the Laredo incident, and several more. His books can be purchased from either roswellbooks.com or from amazon.com. Mr. Torres was presenting at Roswell and thought the LPRS would be a great addition to the lineup. So Ishmael and Gabriela Cuellar, Joe and Claudia Alvarez, their son Pablo, Rick Rodriguez, and a few others packed their bags and headed to the home of one of the biggest UFO stories on the face of the earth. When they got there, Ishmael told Gabriela, "Stanton Friedman is at the museum." To which she said, "Who's that?" It's kind of a big shock to a lot of us when someone isn't familiar with the people we hold in such esteem. Ishmael said he wanted to show Mr. Friedman the video of the triangle. They walked over to the Roswell Museum to speak to the godfather of ufology. "Mr. Friedman, my name is Ishmael Cuellar. I'm a UFO investigator from Laredo, Texas, and I want to show you a flying triangle I caught on video." Well, Stanton Friedman looked at his watch and said, "I have 10 minutes until my presentation." Well, Ishmael was naturally nervous, but he managed to say, "I have my laptop in the truck. I'll run get it and show it to you." Stanton Friedman probably meets 30 or 40 people wishing to show off their photographic evidence every day. I'm sure a lot of it is questionable, and if that good. To us, these pictures might look fantastic, but to Mr. Friedman, they're probably not so wow. Running down the block, Ishmael tried to get there and back in seconds. It took minutes. Too many minutes. Gasping for breath, sweat running in his eyes, he made it back with just a minute or two to spare. As any computer would, it took too long to open, and then there it was, the Laredo Triangle. Mr. Friedman asked if he could play it again. Then he called his wife and his son over to see the video. He then asked if Ishmael would wait so he could go do his lecture and then come back and see the video again. Later, when Mr. Friedman came back, he said that the video was kind of poor quality. It needed something in it to give it perspective. He said next time try to get a street light or something like that in the shot. And get yourself in it too. Ishmael did say that he got the corner of his house in there. Mr. Friedman asked if the object had been silent, to which Ishmael said yes, there had been no sound at all. Suddenly, Mr. Friedman was very interested in this video of a flying triangle. Oh, over the course of the next few hours, Ishmael decided to show Mr. Friedman some of the other paranormal evidence the group had acquired over the years. One was an orb that moved about as if being controlled by some unseen hand. Ishmael asked Mr. Friedman what he thought of the video, and Mr. Friedman, always the scientist, thought, this could be some kind of a ball of energy. Perhaps there's a reasonable explanation that nobody has looked into yet. After the meeting in Roswell, they have attended several UFO conferences together. Jaime Maussan and Stanton Friedman both said the LPRS was the only group to use a projector hooked to a night vision camera in order to scan the sky for UFOs. And the camera is equipped with a 300 power lens, giving a clear image instead of a pixelated blur found in most cameras. When the LPRS does a UFO hunt, they don't have 2 or 3 guys standing out in the field looking at the sky with night vision scopes. Instead, they have about 20 people sitting in front of a big screen TV. The TV is attached to a night vision camera with the 300 power zoom lens, and then the camera is panned back and forth across the sky, giving the entire audience an opportunity to look and see what might be up there. After the LPRS had presented at the UFO conference, they were all asked for their autographs. They had suddenly become celebrities. While they were at Roswell, they met up with Travis Walton and they invited him to attend the Laredo UFO conference that was going to be held November of 2011. Travis Walton was on our show back in April of this year. You can listen to the interview at strangethings.podomatic.com. Just scroll down until you see April 18th, 2018. My wife had bought a Christmas tree ornament that looked like a flying saucer. We took it and had Travis sign the bottom. As he was writing the date, he looked at his watch, and then he said, it was exactly 37 years to the hour since he had been abducted. Each year, when we put up the tree, the first decoration I put on is the flying saucer. I then tell all the cats that they'd better not mess with it or they will become decorations in its place. Of course, they always ignore me. The Laredo Paranormal Research Society do a lot more than chase ghosts or look for UFOs. They also do archaeological research and recovery. While looking into a report of unusual activity, they may find an object, an item, that had been left lying around for the last 100 years or more. After finding a few of these artifacts laying on the ground or under the ground, it was decided to purchase some metal detectors. This would make finding archaeological items much easier. Once the landowner had been contacted and he had granted them permission, the team would begin to work an open area, sweeping back and forth, using the metal detectors and listening for the sound of something long buried in the property. Most of the time, the team would dig up old fencing or oil field parts long since discarded, but on occasion, they would unearth something of value. At one site, Ishmael spotted a round object sticking from the side of a washed-out pit. Pulling the round object from the dirt, he found they had a 50-pound cannonball left behind after a battle of some magnitude. In the same area, they discovered 4 more cannonball, each weighing in at about 20 pounds. They also found a sword sticking out of the dirt. The hilt was intricately carved with artwork, and there was a date showing 1846. This sword may have been used during the Battle of Laredo, between the Union Army and the Southern Army. The words Salud, which means greetings, al Laredo, were carved into the hilt as well. They uncovered grape shot from a cannon, as well as musket balls, which were found in 2 distinct lines, as if 2 opposing forces had been lined up facing each other across a creek. Using metal detectors all around the ancient battlefield, Ishmael found a horseshoe, along with a bridle, and some harness hardware, which was just under the soil. As he was removing the dirt from around his find, he was suddenly overcome by a hot air mass. Considering it was early January, the temperature was around 50 degrees, and then suddenly it was 80. Rick, who was with him, held out his arms and said that the air mass seemed to end right at the end of his hand, waving one hand up and down, and it seemed to extend over to this other side. It was about 5 feet across. As they stood there in wonder of this hot presence, they could feel it moving. After a few minutes, the hot air mass vanished. A second sword hilt was found nearby. This one had Hindi writing on it. Hindi is the language of India. Vasco da Gama, a Portuguese explorer, had landed in India in 1498. The trade between India and the rest of the world would have allowed for weapons made in India to wind up in the New World. At some point in the past, Mexico did trade with India. Items found on private property belong to the landowner, unless it is given to the LPRS. Ishmael said finding an old box full of silver coins or an old lunchbox full of toys is kind of like being Indiana Jones. It's thrilling and exhilarating to touch something from the past that has been buried for 100 years. In another dig site, they found a World War I helmet, along with a bayonet. Fort McIntosh used to use the uninhabited areas around Laredo for training. Over 15,000 troops had spent time at Fort McIntosh during the First World War. Now, the process of writing a book is a bit long. I like fiction. It comes from inside my head, and if I want, I can just make things up. Nonfiction isn't like that. First of all, you have to have your facts straight. The evidence has to be there to support the story. It takes 3 times as long because then you have to check everything out. I managed to finish my end, and I asked some of the LPRS members to just go through and check things like spelling and names. Make sure I had the right picture with the right person. That kind of thing. As I'm writing, I know what the words are supposed to say. So as I'm checking my work, I'll miss many mistakes. I only wanted them to check it over. Now, somebody went into full editor mode. They struck through some sentences and changed a few things. They rewrote a few things. I got the document back, and then I had to go through and rewrite it again because I couldn't get any of the changes to go away. Somehow the document had been locked. So I had 2 different books out at the same time. One is nice and neat with a few spelling mistakes, and the other is a bit of a mess. If by chance you bought the LPRS book in the last few months, you'll see what I mean. The book is still readable, but it has some things in it that I didn't see at first. Get with me and I will get you a better copy somehow. I finally sent the book off to be published. I was hoping to sell a few copies at the next get-together we had at the Legends Comics. Just a few copies. I sold all 100 copies, and folks were asking me for more. With new people joining the LPRS and others wandering away, I decided to do an edit again, only this time I did the edit myself. Any mistakes are mine and mine alone. I hope I caught most of them. There is a lot more in the book that I didn't talk about tonight, things like the Demon House or the Haunted Hotel, just to name a few. If you'd like to get a copy of the Laredo Paranormal Research Society, you can find it at Amazon.com. It can be ordered from just about any bookstore, but they don't keep it on the shelf. Only the big printing companies get their books on the shelves. I have heard of a few bookstores out there that carry independent published books. If you know of one, let me know. I can always use the sales. Should you decide you want to get into ghost hunting or UFO watching, just be careful. Private property is still private, no matter how many ghosts might be hanging out there. People get arrested all the time, sneaking into places where they don't belong. Ask. You never know if the owner might just say yes. If you're going along with a group, ask them if they really have permission to enter. If they tell you they have to sneak in, you might wind up sitting in jail. I hope you enjoyed the show. I put a little bit of work into both it and the book. Now tell your friends what they're missing. If you didn't like it, keep it to yourself. Nobody wants to hear that. Till next week, this is Chris James for Strange Things, and I hope you're having a good time.
Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man, they say murder three? Strange things that happen here, no stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree.